glamour of Hollywood has always dazzled the world. But behind the red carpets and flashing cameras lies a hidden darkness. These are 10 real stories of murder, mystery, and scandal that Hollywood worked hard to bury. Spade Cooley's story begins like the perfect American dream. A handsome Western star, adored on screen and celebrated as the king of Western swing. But that dream turned to horror in April 1961. Consumed by jealousy and convinced his wife Ella Mae was having an affair, Cooley brutally beat her in front of their teenage daughter. The violence was so severe that it caused massive internal injuries, and she died soon after. When the story broke, it shocked fans, but behind the scenes, studio executives scrambled to minimize the damage. Cooley was a popular television figure, and sponsors feared public outrage. Articles downplayed the murder, and some local papers even labeled it a domestic tragedy rather than a crime. He was sentenced to life in prison but maintained his charm behind bars, performing for fellow inmates and even organizing concerts. In 1969, after nearly a decade in prison, he was granted permission to play a show for law enforcement officers. Moments after stepping off the stage, he collapsed and died of a heart attack. Hollywood never spoke of him again. The case of David Whiting remains one of Hollywood's most quietly buried mysteries. In February 1973, Whiting, who worked closely with British actress Sarah Miles, was found dead in her Tucson hotel room during the filming of The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing. There were bruises on Miles's face, suggesting a violent argument the night before. The official ruling was a suicide, an overdose of Seconal. But the investigation was riddled with inconsistencies. MGM executives reportedly pushed to keep the matter quiet to protect the film's release, barring key witnesses from testifying and influencing how evidence was presented. Police later admitted that the crime scene had been compromised by studio personnel before investigators arrived. Whiting's mother fought for a deeper investigation but was ignored. The scandal disappeared from headlines almost as quickly as it appeared, and MGM released the movie just months later, without a single reference to the tragedy that happened on set. In the early 1920s, Mabel Normand was one of the biggest names in silent film. She was beautiful, funny, and loved by millions, and until one fateful day in 1924. After a New Year's Eve party, her chauffeur, Horace Greer, used her pistol to shoot oil broker Cortlandt Dines. Greer claimed he acted to protect Mabel from Dines's unwanted advances, but the press painted her as a dangerous, immoral woman. Though she was never charged, the scandal destroyed her reputation. Studios distanced themselves, and the press, hungry for gossip, portrayed her as reckless and sinful. Hollywood executives quietly decided that Mabel's image was too risky. By the time she died of tuberculosis in 1930, she was already a forgotten star, another casualty of an industry that protects its power, but not its people. In 1977, actor Cliff Robertson took a stand few dared to make. He uncovered that Columbia Pictures executive David Begelman had forged his signature on a $10,000 check. When Robertson went public, Hollywood turned on him. Rather than celebrating his honesty, studios viewed him as a whistleblower, someone who broke the unspoken rule of silence. For nearly 4 years, Robertson found himself blacklisted, with no major roles offered. Begelman, meanwhile, was convicted, but received a light sentence and quickly returned to a new position in the industry. This scandal exposed how corruption ran deep within studio culture, where protecting power meant more than protecting integrity. Robertson's courage ended his mainstream career, but decades later, the truth vindicated him. In 1957, actress Marie "The Body" McDonald stunned the world with her dramatic kidnapping story. She claimed 2 men abducted her at gunpoint from her Los Angeles home, forced her into a car, and held her captive before leaving her in the desert. But when investigators examined her story, it began to fall apart. Her wounds were inconsistent with her claims, and her description of the kidnapping matched scenes from a novel she'd recently been reading. Behind the scenes, MGM and her representatives worked frantically to keep the story quiet, fearing it would make the actress appear unstable. When police concluded that she had likely staged the event, McDonald's career imploded. She insisted until her death that it was real, but in Hollywood, where image was everything, she was quickly discarded. In 1927, Broadway and film actor Paul Kelly found himself at the center of a deadly scandal. He was romantically involved with Dorothy McKay, the wife of actor Ray Raymond. One night in a violent confrontation, Kelly beat Raymond so badly that he died days later from a brain hemorrhage. Kelly was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 2 years at San Quentin. When he was released, he married Dorothy McKay, the widow of the man he killed. Hollywood quietly welcomed him back, erasing the crime from his image. He went on to appear in more than 70 films and television roles. The studio's silence was deliberate. Kelly was talented, marketable, and profitable. His violent past was buried under a carefully managed public persona. Robert Mitchum's arrest in 1948 could have destroyed him, but instead it turned him into a legend. He was caught in a police raid at a Hollywood Hills home, charged with marijuana possession and sentenced to 60 days in jail. At the time, drug use was seen as shocking and shameful. Studios feared that his reputation was finished, but when photos emerged of Mitchum smiling in prison stripes, the public saw something else: rebellion. United Artists quietly worked to reshape his image, turning scandal into marketing. His next film, Rachel and the Stranger, became a hit, and the incident only deepened his tough outsider mystique. Mitchum became one of the first actors to survive, and even benefit from, a Hollywood scandal. Ted Healy, the man who created the Three Stooges, met a mysterious and violent end in 1937. After a night of drinking at the Trocadero nightclub, witnesses said Healy was beaten by several men, including studio-linked figures. Hours later, he was dead. The coroner ruled the cause as acute alcohol poisoning, but photos of his battered face told a different story. Rumors swirled that MGM executives intervened to keep names like Wallace Beery and producer Eddie Mannix out of the investigation. The case was closed without charges, and the media was warned not to dig deeper. Within months, Beery conveniently left the country for an extended vacation. When he returned, the story had vanished. In 1951, actress Joan Bennett was at the height of her fame when her husband, producer Walter Wanger, shot her agent Jennings Lang. Wanger suspected Bennett of having an affair. He followed her to a parking lot, waited, and opened fire. Lang survived, but the scandal destroyed Bennett's image. Though she had done nothing wrong, studios cut ties, sponsors withdrew, and the press branded her the adulteress of Hollywood. Wanger served just 4 months in jail and returned to producing films, while Bennett spent years trying to rebuild her career. Hollywood's moral code was clear. A man's violence could be forgiven, but a woman's perceived disloyalty could not. And finally, one of Hollywood's darkest and most silent stories, Patricia Douglas. In 1937, MGM hosted a morale party for hundreds of male employees. Dozens of young women, including Douglas, were hired as dancers and told it would be a professional event. Instead, it was a drunken gathering. Douglas was assaulted and raped by a salesman named David Ross. When she reported the crime, MGM executives launched a ruthless campaign to discredit her, spreading lies, pressuring witnesses, and ensuring no charges were filed. Her name was dragged through tabloids, her reputation destroyed, and her career ended. Patricia Douglas disappeared from public life, her story buried for nearly 70 years. It wasn't until the early 2000s that journalists uncovered court documents and exposed the cover-up, revealing how deeply the studio had manipulated the system to protect its image. These scandals show how the golden age of Hollywood was never as pure as it seemed. For every star shining under the spotlight, there were secrets, crimes, and victims hidden in the shadows. Hollywood's greatest talent wasn't just in storytelling, it was in erasing the truth.